Welcome to Bringing Magic Down to Earth, where we talk about making spiritual gifts feel attainable. I'm Kate Hood, and today I am talking to Laurie Wheeler. Laurie is a intuitive and a healer, and she specializes in alchemical transformation. Welcome, Laurie.
Oh, thank you, Kate. Thanks for having me today.
Well, I'd love to start with just you telling us a little bit or a lot of it about yourself.
Great. I'd love to share that. I consider myself a star seed, and that is somebody who is what I understand to be an interplanetary soul. And that means that's where my soul comes from, where it originates, and how often I incarnate in this particular world. Or elsewhere. But I am more an energy receptor, translator, and communicator. And so I've worked in this for many years, over 30 years now. I share my work as a medium, a channeler, medical intuit. I am a homeopathic practitioner. I work in scanning the energy fields of a person, of the body. I work in a shamanic journey work, and I speak light language, which is a particular coded language of the light. And I work in past life and between lives, soul regression, the Akashic records, and I'm an activator in recoding DNA. It's a mouthful. And the reason is because I work in energy. And so there are many facets to energy and how we're capable of adjusting or recalibrating or working in the light. And so I've just learned different ways of doing that, really. That's just really what it is when it boils down. Um, I've written a book, Oh No, Not Another Learning Experience, a metamorphosis. So that's both my personal and professional work coming through. And it was a lot of fun. I channeled the book, and it's an easy read, but it was a lot of fun to write and just get that information out. It was like coming out. um, and I am a creator and host of Spirit Adventure Tours, where I'm privileged to take people globally to sacred places like Peru and Sedona and Mexico, Hawaii, Glastonbury, south of France. And this year, November, we go to Egypt. So that's kind of it in the nutshell, so to speak. Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, it's a vast amount of information. I have maybe like 500 questions to ask. So we'll have to limit it to certain areas.
Yeah.
But just to go back just a tiny bit more, like how did this all unfold for you? Because a lot of people who are watching this are sort of in those beginning stages, or they've been on their journey for a while, but they're like, wow, how I want to do all that, but I can only do like this one thing. I'm assuming that you didn't start everywhere.
No,
Where did it start for you?
absolutely not. This started probably, and I've now lost count, but it could be close to 40 years ago, but somewhere in there. And this is where my work to date has taken me to. So you're right. I haven't been this extensive in my work for that entire time. And I would say, had a rough road coming into it, actually, but that oftentimes is an indicator of actually where you're going to go with all of it and what your maturity of your soul is capable of handling. So I want to say the harder it is, the more you are here to learn and the more capability you have. And so I came by way of my understanding through, and this is my story, is that, well, I've always been sort of in tuned, and I've always received visions way back when I was 5 years old, even. And so I'm a person that really pays attention and listens, and I act on my visions and my guidance. But I had a second awakening in my 30s, like my early 30s. And with my family, 4 children, and my first husband, we built a house, and we had very toxic water. It was well water, and we became sick. I became very sick. And one of the aspects that happened to me was I lost my memory. I lost a lot of what I would say my intellectual thinking in a sort of way. I could not remember how to go to town. I could not remember things. And I would say, really, even to this day, my memory is not fabulous. But what it did open up for me, and let me mention at the same time what was occurring on the land. We built a house on this land on 12 acres. And what I came to find out, it was native burial ground. So we got a double whammy. We got the spiritual aspect and we got the biological aspect. And for me, I call that a rude awakening because it was just so intense to go through, losing memory, losing a lot of capabilities. And when you look at loss in life, this tells you a lot of what's going on for an individual as well. But where I was going with that is what it opened up was my opportunity to explore my capabilities. So, when you lose your memory, when you lose certain aspects of your intellect, what do you have to rely on, right? So what I had to rely on was my intuition, and it had to grow. So I had no choice almost but to start following more in depth my intuition. And I had to grow that. That wasn't like just there. I really had to. One of the big things I had to do was, one, practice, two, trust, and three, build on it. And I would say everybody who is connected or has a realization or wants to learn that or becomes more of, has those three aspects in line for themselves. So it's super important. I've met and communicated throughout this with many ancestors and spirits and guides and masters and councils and interdimensionals. And one of the capabilities I learned was through my hands, and it's called psychometry. Now, there are people who are healers that work with their hands, but this is a little different. I do receive information through my hands, but in psychometry, it's the kind of thing that I can put my hands near something or touch something, and I get many people give me things to read for them, and I can read the energy of it. And I'm told I'm pretty spot on by other people, what they know. Like, I'll have somebody give me their grandmother's ring, and so this whole information begins to open up. And this also began to open up my capability of medical intuition. I started to see things. I'm not a doctor. I'm not anything in that medical understanding, but I've grown my what I call my dictionary of understanding when something comes, what it is. So this opened up a lot of things for me, and the capacity to be able to read energy. I can go anywhere pretty much and read almost anything. And so that puts me where I am today, so to speak.
Well, it sounds like you received a lot of help through that guidance, the guides that you were connecting with.
Yeah, so I don't mention too often, but so I was very intrigued by Native American wisdom, because when I lived on that land, I had an experience, and the experience was I bilocated. And bilocation means you're in two places at once. I didn't know what it was. I knew nothing about it. I was not that great at understanding. This was all new to me in this aspects of learning. And so I found myself, we had a special tree on the land, and I found myself being drawn to this tree one day when I was out in the yard. And I walked well into the woods, leaned up against this tree, and I was what I call teleported or bilocated to another place in time. Now, we realize time is not what it is. It's not today, tomorrow. There's all this time going on all at once in the multiverse. And so I was in another time, and there was a scout party that had come upon at night this this tribe, and they, waged war on this tribe, and many were slaughtered and killed. And so what happened when I leaned up against this tree, I immediately went to this place like I was at a funeral for hundreds of people, but I didn't know them. And all of that energy went right into me. I mean, literally, it felt like it just went in me. And I felt like I was mourning for all these people, but I had no idea who they were. So this story began to develop and unfold, and it was part of my teaching. And then out of that, long story short, I had a connection to Sitting Bull, who was of the Lakota tribe. Interestingly enough, I was born in Montana, in Great Falls, Montana, which is part of where the Lakota tribe lives. And so there's a history there. And so, long story short, that began to open me into shamanic understanding and working with different guides, and it developed from there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, and you work with a lot of different guides. So would you say that each of them has come at a time to kind of introduce you to like a new sort of work that you're going to be bringing in?
Sometimes they do. It depends on who it is. Sometimes I work with other people's guides. Sometimes it's ancestors. But when it is interdimensionals, the masters, they do come at appropriate times, when what I call when we up level ourselves. So when in our learning experience, it's like chapters of a book in a sort of way. And when you're learning something, you're in this chapter, you're in this space of learning it. And when you've reached a sort of what I call a plateau and ready to go on and move into your next chapter, there is certain guidance that comes. And so many interdimensionals have come to teach me things. Yeah.
Hmm. And one of those things, I have heard you speak on this recently, DNA repatterning and recoding. That's one of the things that came through guidance as well.
Yeah, so I've been privileged to be given these specific codes, and I call them codes because everything is coded in our entire multiverse. It's just that we don't realize it's really a code, but it is. And so in these codes, they've been given by 5 different star groups: the Arcturians, Pleiadians, Lyrans, Sirius, and Andromedans, and each has their own aspect and numerous of them within each grouping, but they've put together what I call, or what they call, a manual for humanity. And it gives all kinds of information. It's not like it's a book and there it is, you're reading page by page. It's codes. And so opening these codes at different times opens us to different things to learn. And it talks about all kinds of things, but one of the things it does is it works individually or in groups with people, and it sends information, or it opens information within that person. And it's individual for each person what it's going to become, what that person's going to become aware of. But it also just gives practical information as well. Like for years now working with them, I'm able to see many of the different patternings of energy, quantum scalar, different electromagnetics, all of this, DNA, the coding of each individual. And what's really fascinating is each person has within them, they have their own stagnant areas. When I open those stagnant areas up, their story. And so it's like, it reads like, it opens like a wormhole, and I go into it, and then I can expand it and understand what that story is, what's held for that person in there. And it's like a working together on this. We work together with it. And so it can change. It changes the story, and it changes the coding that's held in there. So that's just one aspect of it. It's fascinating work. I love it. It's my passion because I see what it does for people. It's incredible. So yeah.
And that is a form of healing, because especially, and it sounds like it's interactive because when you're talking about story, that's someone's personal narrative. So you tell them what you're seeing. Do they then say, okay, yes, and that has to do with this part of my childhood, and you kind of go back and do some healing there?
Yeah, it's definitely healing. And what I've come to understand working with this quantum biologist in subtle energies is that um, well, each story is different. Each wormhole is different, actually. But it is interactive, and we've understood now there's more than one kind of healing, actually. And that, to me, that's fascinating, because we just categorize healing as healing, but it's different. And these codes are revealing a lot of information around healing, which is new and cutting edge. And so it's fascinating. Yeah, it's really, and yes, it is interactive. So as this happens, I'm speaking with an individual, they're sharing back what they're feeling. I love hearing what people are feeling, because they can't possibly know what I'm doing, and yet they're expressing to me exactly what is going on. And so it's just amazing how it lines up.
It is, and we know with energy healing that it is happening, but for a lot of people, like some people really feel it very strongly. I've had both. I've been in healing and like really felt the energy, and then there have been times when I've been like, okay, they say they're doing something, I'm gonna take their word for it. I don't actually feel it, but to be able to like talk through it, sometimes. I don't know. I'm definitely a thinker. So I'm just kind of thinking through like how everyone experiences things differently. Some people are just ready to just go right there and they feel it all in their body and they're, natural feelers. And then a lot of us, and this was me, I actually am a natural feeler, but I put up a lot of blocks around that to protect myself earlier on. And it's been a real process of removing those and feeling a little more safe when it comes to the more feeling work and it's interesting to see how even just that kind of healing can help with that, like healing those blocks, those barriers we put up to like, okay, that's a very scary area, never going there again. And then to like go through that wormhole and go there and how do you make it feel safe for people? This just was kind of the first thing I thought. I was like, wow, that's for some people that might be really scary. It's like you just went right inside of me.
Yeah. Well, oh, that's interesting that you asked that. I love that. Thank you. You know, I'm not exactly positive how I make somebody feel that way. I've been around people that I don't myself don't feel comfortable with, but it's an immediate feel. I don't use my brain. I'm like feeling it, right? So I think that has a lot to do with the vibe you give off. Second, I've been in my work a long time. I have a lot of compassion and no judgment for people's stories. For me, it's like it's a story. Everybody has a story. Everybody that walks the face of the earth has a story. So, who am I to judge what your story is? I'm here just to help you align yourself. So, whatever the story is, that's your vehicle. That's the way I look at it. So, with no judgment, I think people feel that. I work really well with young people because they also feel comfortable with me. It's just me. But I also try to explain a lot. I have a quality within me that I'm a teacher. And so I think that's part of it too. I always want to share information and explain things so people can understand. For me, it's important that people understand. Don't do it or feel it because I say it, but it's got to be right and feel right for you. That's most important, because that's a respect and an honor of that individual. And so we set up an honor, and I think that just goes even without words, really. I think when you talk about you felt different kinds of healing, I think that's important to understand that that actually does happen. And why that is it has to do with what you're working on, who you're working with, and the guidance that's coming in. So with who you're working with, that also has to do with how open their energy is to receiving and how clear of a transmitter they are. I remember years ago, there was a native man, I think he was 99 years old, and he spoke about being hollow bones. And it was like, yeah, I get that because I'm just the conduit. I'm not the one really doing much of anything. I am a conduit. That's the way I perceive myself. It's between you and the light that is coming in, the energy that is coming in, and what needs to occur. I'm just bringing the two together. So I hollow myself in a sort of way, like just allow it to run through and bring what I need and understand it so that I can bring clarity to that individual. And I always ask for clarity when I'm working as well. And then whoever is coming in to bring that, because they have a job on the other side as well. So is it your master guide? Is it your, higher self? Is it some special interdimensional or master, or who is it that's bringing it? So it's a lot of different little working pieces that all culminate to make a reaction happen. And then there's another aspect to things happening is that we have to activate. So one thing that I've learned with the scientists that I'm working with is that, so we took a bottle of DNA and we put it on the codes and we just left it there in the sun. And when he went to collect his data about it, it hadn't really changed much. And so we realized then the next experiment we did, and he collected data, was about bringing in the energy, right? So I was activating the energy. I was activating the coded information into the DNA. And when he checked that, it then changed to 142% of activation of energy coming in. So we went from almost nothing into 142%, which is extremely high. Okay. And so what we came to understand is it's not like just taking a rock or a crystal or something and putting it somewhere. We must activate it. And what that means is we must engage with it. And how do we engage with it? We activate it through our intuition, through our like, I intend this, I desire this, we must kind of say something to get something to occur. So that's what's super important as well. So if you're working with the crystal, it might be simply just saying, I activate this crystal to bring whatever, fill in the blank. But you've now engaged with it, It's like standing in front of somebody and not having a conversation or anything. Well, there's no interaction, right? Must be interaction. So very important. One thing that we learned, and I think that's greatly important when we're working with something. Yeah.
Well, sure. So that's interesting. It's almost like in this sort of setting, if I was to ask you to just teach a class, you teach your class. But if I'm asking you questions, then that changes the content of the class. It
Yeah.
becomes more of a conversation.
Yeah.
I think there's a real trend towards everything becoming much more interactive. Most healers that I talk to, they are not interested in just putting someone on a table and just doing healing on them. It's much more of a co-creation of who they're working with. Like they're working together on it. And I think it's partly because we've learned that you can do a healing on somebody, and if they don't do anything themselves, they'll just restructure all that all over again. They'll just bring it all right back to where they were because they didn't actually make any changes.
Yeah. 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 And sometimes change takes a while to happen because it has to integrate, So I think that's another aspect that, we're an instantaneous populace. And so we need to realize that as it integrates, this is creating a reaction. So it's your reaction and then what you do with it, the action that occurs as a result. That's what's really important. This is just the catalyst. It's the reaction and what you do with it. And I find myself almost every day now, doesn't matter who I'm talking to, clients, people, friends, could be someone on the grocery line, you know, it's about what we do with it, because that's what the greater understanding of, you know, that's why we incarnate, come back time after time to learn different things, but it's what we're doing with it, you know, as a result of that really matters. So, um, and then I just back to healing again. I want to like share this little piece of new information with the scientist I'm working with. We're also looking at water. Water is a huge test and subject matter. And because we know water, we know the principles, we know the molecular structure, we know, and we're mostly made up of water. We're made up of structured water, which is not the same water as like the water that comes out of your tap. Okay, it's restructured. And so in the work I'm doing, when I activated and brought in the codes for the water, what happened was I could see the molecular compound in my eyes, like it looks like a beehive, you know, these little beehive symbols. And I could see the H's and the O's, hydrogens and oxygens and whatever else. And then it began to change. It began to restructure the molecular compound of it. Now, I don't want to get over people's head and get too heady in science, but that's what we're made up of. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so it began to change this, which then it changed something about it. So it went from this to this. And this shows us how energy begins to change us in our biology. And that's really important, because now the codes are teaching me about cell regeneration. This is super important work, because scientists have been not understanding how this all occurs. And so the codes are teaching some of this to me, and I'm not going to get into all of that, but it's pretty fascinating it's unlocking this hidden information, because it's time that we really learn more about healing at multi levels. And so yeah, it's important for us to understand all about the energy, instead of just hand it over to somebody and say, here, you heal me, you know. Mm-hmm. It's not where we need to be. We need to take charge and accountability for our healing, and that we're capable of this our own selves.
You know, it's so interesting to hear you talk about all of this and talking about science, because really, when we go back to like where you came from, your background is like where things started. It didn't start with you being really, really interested in science as a kid. Maybe you were, but it really started with you being this very powerful intuitive. And so, yeah, you could have just stayed in that and, you know, played in that area of just talking to guides and, you know, feeling the magic of the day, but you're making this bridge of where the, you know, this kind of perceivably mystical experience is actually part of our human experience, and science is part of that. I love that, because I feel like there's maybe not as much now, but back from when my mom was starting to get interested in like the new age stuff, and I remember those, and not that that was sort of the beginning of my story, but I didn't realize it was at the time. I just thought she was a little weird, and it was fun. But it was very like, okay, here we are on Earth, and I'm not going to do this right now. I'm going to go over here and play in this, you know, this magical area, to be bringing that magic back down to Earth and say, this is magic. This is just three-dimensional magic. It's all part of the same thing. You're kind of pioneering that in a way.
Well, thank you. I am kind of. So, you know, let's back up. When I was a kid, my favorite subject was biology. I was intrigued by it. But I never pursued it because I had visions that told me what exactly was coming. And I actually had a vision of a baby carriage with 4 heads in it. And the first one had a pink bonnet, then I had two others, and then there was a blanket, and then the fourth. And so, sure enough, I had my children very early in life because it was deemed that I was to have them and then to go on into my work at a certain time. And so everything planned out. And one thing I do is I listen. And it's not like I planned it that way, but I went along with it, let's say, So I didn't fight the movement and the flow of that. And so I had a girl first. I had two boys. Then I had right in a row, 3 and 3.5 years. That was a lot. And then there was a space and time. And then I had my fourth child. So everything kind of came in a planned out way. But I was very interested in biology, and I was interested in the stars and outer space and things like that. And my grandmother could read tea leaves. And so she was connected, but she didn't understand all of this. She just knew that she had this capability. And this runs in families as well. And I remember, like, even at 8 years old, she'd read my tea leaves. She lived in Canada, so I didn't get to see her all that often. But when I did, she'd read my tea leaves. And I was fascinated about this. I wanted to know how to do that. And here's the interesting thing, and I'm going to share this with everybody. When you have that passion, or that what I call that juice for purposeful living comes out in you, like, I want to know more about this. I want to know. I'm curious. And that's the nature of my own self, is I'm super curious about so much. So when we're like this, like, it draws you, it pulls you, but there's a reason for that, So the fact that I wanted to know about this, and I wanted to be like my grandmother when I grew up, like, I wanted to be able to read tea leaves, Little did I know that reading was, beyond tea leaves, but it gave me like the introduction to that, because I wanted to help people. And my grandmother would tell stories about different people that she read for. And one time, really long story short, she, back in her early days, which, gosh, this has to be probably about 90 years ago, she read in a hotel, in the lobby of a hotel. And she'd read for the people that would come in. They were, back in that day, it was a very high class hotel. So these people had a little bit of money to spend. And so she'd get a nickel or a dime for reading somebody's tea leaves, right? And I remember one story she told. She read for a woman and she advised the woman was going to what they called a ball in those days, right? Some big do gathering, right, of sophisticated people coming together. And so she read for this woman and she advised her not to go, because she said, there's going to be a tragic incident that will occur, and my advice is not to go to this. But, did the woman listen? No. And there was a huge fire and many died in the fire. And so, I've had things like this happen my own self. I remember a person I knew. He was a chiropractor, and he was very upset by one of his clients could not write out a check for payment to him. And I remember having a conversation with him that day, and he said he's really concerned about her. I immediately could go into her field, and I could see she had a tumor in the back of her head. And I said, she needs to get to the emergency and have an operation, or at least get in some medical care immediately. And 2 days later, she was dead. So, the sudden urgency of feeling energy, we get a sense of things, and there's purpose in all of it. We just have to understand, like, what to do with it and how to use it. And we are the influencers of energy as well, So when we're receiving, you have to understand what it is that's coming in. And if you don't, ask for more clarity, wait to hear. But also, we influence our energy field as well. Yeah, so I think it's important to understand what it is all about.
Yeah. And those are really extreme examples, but we of things that we experience on a daily basis just through our intuition. Should I don't really just suddenly don't really feel like doing this thing that I was supposed to do. Why? Asking yourself that. It might, maybe it's because you have some fear. It's not necessarily an intuition thing, it's more of a fear thing, but we can usually tell. At this point, anybody who's watching this, they know themselves well enough that they can start to differentiate between fear and intuition. But that those intuitive hits of like, why am I so interested in hearing about this woman's work as a alchemical transformation specialist? It's like, I've never even thought about this before. Why am I so fascinated? Well, maybe it's because there's something in there for you. Like, this is part, anything we're drawn to. And that and this summit is for people who are really like they're the seekers. They're finding like what their gifts are, and it's the range from people who I've talked to, people who have, it seems to me like they're extremely accomplished, but they just feel like there's something else that needs to unlock. And then there are people who are like, I don't think I can do anything. It's like, well, so, but that's not true, right?
No, absolutely not true. They just haven't opened up to it yet. And so there are ways to open up to it. And there's much that's out there right now of people teaching others of how to open to that. And there's varying degrees of what you're here to do. In fact, most all of us have lost our memory in the way that we have forgotten who we really are. And there's purpose in that. So if you are not accessing that information, there may be a reason that, and so it's about finding out what that reason is. Maybe you aren't supposed to remember. Maybe there's something else you're supposed to do, or maybe you haven't come into learning it. It's the timely thing. I mean, there could be numerous reasons. And going back to the thought of the differentiation between fear and the intuition, I think there are still times where people have difficulty discerning between fear and intuitive hits. And the one thing I think with an intuitive hit is that what becomes clear in that is that and this is what I have said for years, my brain would never be able to think that up. Okay. That's how I know, and it's not to say I'm stupid or not capable or whatever. It's just my brain just wouldn't have even thought that. I know it wouldn't have thought that. There's no way. I know myself enough to know that, and then I know my own stuff, will say, what causes fear inside of me is very important to know ourselves. And so if you can use that as an overlay, of what is happening at the moment and you're trying to discern, you take this, your overlay of your stuff, and you see if it fits. Does it fit? If it fits, then it's fear-based. If it doesn't, and you can say, there's just no way that I would know that, or I could think that, or what, then it's your intuitive. And that sometimes helps us discern between which it is. I mean, sometimes we really just know, but sometimes if you have difficulty, I think those are two good avenues to figure it out for yourself.
Yeah. And so for people who are like, I feel like I'm intuitive, I want to bring more of that out, and you just said there's ways, there are things out there that will help you do that. When you work with people, do you find that part of the work you do, it is opening them up and their gifts open for them?
Oh, absolutely. So oftentimes when I'm working with the codes, I can tell. So it's not even just the codes, even when I'm just working with somebody in one way or another, I can immediately, I have this own reference within myself that I know. I say it's a person is sludgy. Sorry for the word. What I mean by sludge, like if you've ever come across sludge, okay, it's thick, it doesn't move, right? So that means their field is not open and vibrating at a certain level to receive. So if it's sludgy, it's time to clear this. And in the clearing, it moves different. And so when it moves different, you can access more of that information. And so that also opens your intuitive skills. But there's often something that creates that sludge. And usually it has to do with, I'm not good enough. I can't do that. It's programs that are running. So when I talked about this energy field, okay, and I can see the different stagnant areas like wormholes, right? And there's all these fields going on where this is happening. So the rest of the field can move, but it's like what I call a skip in the record. When it gets to that field, that particular wormhole, it like does a jump. It causes a stagnation. It doesn't move with the rest of the energy. So what's in that? So that's a program running from somewhere. And if you think about it like a computer, when you get a glitch in your computer, it's not everything that glitches. It's just that particular program or that happening that's glitching. And so you have to take it somewhere if you don't know how to fix computers, right? And oftentimes it's not so easy to be objective about ourselves, right? So, and I hear this quite often with people that I work with, because I make 2 + 2 = 4. I take and connect the dots so we understand ourselves. Very important. That's why we incarnate. That's why we have experience, because it's about understanding so that we can shift it. But when you take your computer somewhere and they adjust the glitch, now that software is running better. Well, our energy field is like software. It runs in a certain way. So it has to be clear. And what are the blocks that are creating that? And we hear so often about blocks. They're programs, they're codes that are written in, like you've probably seen somewhere in some movie or something, binary codes, zeros and ones, right? So it's a glitch in that code, that coded information. And so the software is not functioning properly. We're not functioning in alignment with the rest of our codes, right? So that code needs to be recoded. It needs to be recalibrated. That means brought back to its original so that it functions this way. And if it's not, it's causing a glitch. So we need to know what that is. And then we have to have something in energy, something energy based to help clear that. And so even when I say energy based, energy healing, but at the same time, we look at food. Food is energy healing as well, because it is light in varying degrees, and it is energy, and it speaks and communicates to the rest of our biology. And so our biology speaks to one another as well. You have all these frequencies going on in your being, and they're communicating. And so if you eat something wrong or not so good for you, they're communicating saying, don't love this, So like if you get sick from some toxic or something, or you're just off your path and eating too much sugar or whatever, microorganisms begin to take place and take hold in your system. This is the communication going on biologically as well. So you have all these programs running, and we need to communicate clearly.
Yeah, so it's really important to pay attention to this holistic, have more of a holistic approach to how you're looking at your energy. And so you want to open to your intuitive gifts, but if you're not taking care of yourself, if you're if you're not, like you said, maybe things that you're eating, it's getting in the way. It would be nice if there was one easy answer. One person can be like, oh, I see your problem right now. But it is a little bit of work. You have to investigate a bit and maybe look at the different areas. But what you really do work with people on is that repatterning, that finding those, well, the repatterning and the recoding, and that's very much on a DNA level. And I think that's actually, you have a free gift for us, which it's repatterning to align with my soul's divine blueprint.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's
It's
that?
all about repatterning.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to check that out because I feel like, that this is some pretty high level stuff that you've shared with us. And there you have to, it's like, okay, well, where do I start? And that might be a good place.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So, and just a little, just if I can make a point here, we get concerned about, oh my gosh, I was brought up in this, particular situation. And so I have these, we'll just call them codes or programs or blocks running in me, and I'm well aware of it. And yes, we do. Okay. But you also have free will to think otherwise. Now, so in a moment when you use your old patterning, when that comes up, right? Consciousness is about becoming aware that in that moment you are using the old patterning, and that you get an opportunity. It's a split second, okay, where you can use another patterning, where you can be connected with your high self, where you can listen to what's coming in, because the high self is advising and guiding you to shift to this, because this is more within your divine nature. And so shifting. So it's not always, and I don't want people to hear me say that, about having to go to someone to have a healing per se. And I'm not opposed to that, because sometimes we have difficulty changing it. But we need to be accountable for ourselves as well, and know that we have great power. We are more powerful than what we ever give ourselves that acknowledgement for. And how I know that is because I've brought many people and myself to the opportunity of experiencing the magnificence of the soul. When everything else does not matter, when you do not feel any of your stuff, when you just are in the divine of who you are. That's why we don't want to leave it. That's why it's peace, it's bliss, it's calm, it's beautiful, because that's who we are. You know, we just have this programming. So if you can choose that, be accountable for choosing that in the moment. Okay. Ask the high self, help me remember at that moment so that I can shift it. You've now imprinted that into the energy field. That's going to bring to you what you want, just like anything else. And that's a way to do it. So just wanted to mention that.
oh no, and that's huge. I get so interested in what people do. It's like you get so focused on like, okay, your process and what do you do? And people listening are thinking like, okay, well, I don't know if I can do that right now, or I don't, it's like I'm working on something else. So basically I'm stuck where I am until I can go to you
No.
for services. And yeah, it's very important to feel empowered and
And
yeah, and there's a time and there's divine timing for these things too. Sometimes it's like, yes, I really should go to Laurie and get this help, but this isn't the right time for it. I'll know when it is.
Mhm.
And in the meantime, you have a YouTube channel, which, after the summit, I share all the links for the speakers. So if you have trouble finding it, don't worry, I can get it to you. And you work on all kinds of things. And I think you're currently working on building more, a community where people can. And so if you get that free gift, you'll get on Laurie's list, and you can, when that's available, you'll get information on that. So you can have like be part of this world, this incredible holistic approach, bringing magic down to earth work that she does. Um, yeah, so I think that this would be a good place to end, but if I would love for you to leave us with some words of wisdom.
I'd love to share this. This is always fun. And I tell this to kids too, my grandkids and others. There's this most potent word, okay? And we've all used it probably as children, but we probably don't use it as adults. But it's potent. And all it is one word. And the word is abracadabra. And in Aramaic language from the 3rd century AD, the original meaning to that, and now we have to realize it's the original meaning that matters, what we're putting out. It means I create as I speak. And that's a potent word because we are all masters. We just have to acknowledge and recognize that about ourselves. So when you want to create something, think, this is word association, abracadabra. You are empowered.